All right. Afreemanornot, you ready?
I am pretty damn ready, as a matter of fact. Yes.
Hey, wonderful. So, welcome to the book reading. This is Afreemanornot. He has done voice acting, readings, parodies, and much more. He has a YouTube channel that everybody can subscribe at. I'm going to go ahead and post it in voice chat links. He'll be reading the Stanley Parable, and then we'll have an open discussion after the reading. I would go ahead and ask everybody to go ahead and mute their mics now, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Rightio and rightio. Hello everyone, Freeman's the name. And today I'm going to be reading to you something that a fair few of you might have heard about before, but more along the line of it being a game, known as the Stanley Parable. I am going to be reading it as the story that it actually is supposed to portray, and the way it was actually originally written by Davy Vrendon and William Pugh. Or Pugh, I actually don't know. It's an H at the end. Anyway, get ready, friends. We're going to dive straight into the story. This is the story of a man named Stanley. Stanley worked for a company in a big building where he was employee number 427. Employee 427's job was simple. He sat at his desk in room 427 and he pushed buttons on a keyboard. Orders came to him through a monitor on his desk, telling him what buttons to push, how long to push them, and in what order. This is what employee 427 did in every day of every month of every year. And although others might have considered it soul-rendering, Stanley relished in every moment that the orders came in, as though he had been made perfectly for this job. And Stanley was happy. And then one day, something very peculiar happened. Something that would forever change Stanley. Something he would never quite forget. He had been at his desk for nearly an hour when he realized that not one single order had arrived on the monitor for him to follow. No one had showed up to give him instructions, call a meeting, or even say hi. Never in all his years at the company had this happened. This complete isolation. Something was clearly wrong. Shocked, frozen solid, Stanley found himself unable to move for the longest time. But as he came to his wits and regained his senses, he got up from his desk and stepped out of his office. All of his co-workers were gone. What could it mean? Stanley decided to go to the meeting room. Perhaps he had simply missed a memo. And as Stanley came to a set of two open doors, he entered the door on his left. Yet there was not a single person here. As Stanley entered the meeting room, feeling a wave of disbelief, Stanley decided to go up his boss's office, hoping he might find an answer there. As he came to the staircase, Stanley walked upstairs to his boss's office. As he came up, Stanley was faced with a large oak door. It was grand. It was most definitively his boss's. After all, only he could afford such extravagant entry. Stepping into his manager's office, Stanley was once again stunned to discover that not an indication of any human life. Shocked, unraveled, Stanley wondered in disbelief who orchestrated this. What dark secret was being held from him? What he could not have known was that there was a keypad behind the boss's desk that held the answers to his terrible truth that his boss had been keeping from him, and so the boss had assigned it an extra secret PIN number, 2845, but of course, Stanley couldn't possibly have known this. Despite this, Stanley still looked behind his boss's painting and found the keypad, and yet incredibly, by simply pushing random buttons on the keypad, Stanley happened to input the correct code by sheer luck. Amazing! He stepped into his newly opened passageway. Descending... The passageway led into an elevator. The elevator only had two buttons. The buttons were labeled with Office and Control Room. What the hell could this be? Stanley descended therefore deeper into the building after he pressed the Control Room button. And Stanley realized that he felt a bit peculiar. It was a stirring emotion in his chest, as though he felt more free to think for himself, to question the nature of his job. Why did he feel like this now, when for years it had never occurred to him? The questions would not go unanswered for long. Stanley then suddenly felt the elevator stopped. As the door opened, there was a strange silence in the room. One step out of the elevator, and Stanley could hear the echo of metal through a very, very large room, but it was far too dark to see what was there. Stanley walked straight ahead, and then, suddenly, the lights rose in an enormous room packed with television screens came up before him. What horrible secrets did this place hold? Stanley thought to himself. Did he have the strength to find out? Stanley had to have that strength. He went up to the middle of the room, and the monitors then jumped to life, their true nature revealed. Each one bore the number of an employee of the building. Each one was Stanley's co-workers. The lives of many individuals reduced to images on a screen, and Stanley was one of them, eternally monitored in this place where freedom meant nothing. This was a mind control facility. It was too horrible to believe. It couldn't be true. Had Stanley really been under someone else's control this whole time? Was Stanley the only reason he was happy with his job? That this enormous, manipulative machine had allowed him to accept everything so blindly? As Stanley looked around, he saw that there were several pads with labeled buttons such as happy, sad, exhausted, hungry, and, well, the emotions went on and on and on. And Stanley refused to believe it. He couldn't accept it. His own life in someone else's control. Never. It was unthinkable. Wasn't it? Wasn't it even possible? Had he truly spent his entire life utterly blind to the world? But here was the proof. The heart of the operation. Controls labeled with emotions. Happy or sad, content, walking, eating, working, all of it monitored and commanded from this very place. Stanley started to even be uncertain if he had a life outside of this office, if he truly had anything but his desk, his computer, and the monitor above him. Was Stanley really relevant in the world? Was he anything? Stanley allowed this cold reality of his to sink in. And then suddenly he decided that this machinery would never again exert its terrible power over another human life, for he would dismantle the controls once and for all. And so Stanley stepped into the middle of the room. In the middle, there was one big button, a big red glowing button. Stanley at this point did not really know and understand the cruxes that big red buttons are to be avoided, so Stanley decided he pushed it. And as he did, darkness, blackness, and a rising chill of uncertainty. Was it over? He heard several tinkering sounds within the walls, machinery moving about, but he wasn't entirely certain what this was all about. Stanley was left in the dark, not entirely certain about his future. Was this the end? Would Stanley remain here for the remainder of his time? Would he ever be loved? Would he ever be remembered? Stanley started to sob as the emotions got the best of him. But suddenly, something happened to Stanley. The floor he sat on was rising. He also heard and felt the machinery beneath him moving about as the platform that he was on ascended through the darkness and then abruptly stopped. Stanley was a bit scared. What the hell was this all about? He heard some more tinkering noises around him. And then suddenly, he heard something. The sound of some form of metal contraction that was continuously tinkering in front of him this time. And so suddenly, a door opened. What looked like a large hangar door. An in-pierced light. For the first time in Stanley's life, He was blinded by something that did not feel like artificial lights. Nothing of a light bulb, no. He felt heat. It felt so real. And then, as the blindness subsided, before Stanley was something beautiful. Yes, Stanley now realized. Right before him laid freedom. He had won. He had defeated the machine, unshackled himself from someone else's command. Freedom was mere moments away. And yet, even this immense door, as it slowly opened, Stanley reflected upon the many puzzles still laying unsolved. Where had his co-workers gone? How had he been freed from the machine's grasp? What other mysteries did this strange building hold? But as sunlight streamed into the chamber and now covered the entirety of Stanley's body, he realized none of this mattered to him. For it was not knowledge or even power that he had been seeking, but happiness. After all, he had been commanded to feel happiness on times. He didn't want that. He wanted true happiness. Nothing you could just give on command. Something that you could relish in every moment, because of the sheer fact of the amazingness that just occurred, whatever it may be. The birth of a child to the release of a prisoner. Back to life. And Stanley truly felt this. Right before him, the door had fully opened, and a beautiful green meadow was right in front of him. Stanley decided that he would take one step out. But right before he sat down his foot, he dragged it back and decided, no, this has to be done properly. This has to be entertained thoroughly. Stanley took off his worker's shoes and his socks and rolled up his pants and the sleeves of his shirt. And so Stanley placed his feet from the cold metal floor onto the warm, embracing grass beneath him. Another color other than gray. It was green. It was blue. It was yellow. It was luscious. And Stanley felt as if though that he now finally truly was free. No longer would anyone tell him where to go, what to do, what to feel. Whatever life he chose, it will be from this point on his choice, and no one else's. And that was all he needed to know. It was perhaps the only thing worth knowing. And Stanley stepped out into the beautiful, beautiful landscape that stretched out before him. Stanley felt the cool breeze upon his skin, the feeling of liberation, the immense possibility of the new path before him. This was exactly the way. Right now, for all the things that were to happen before him would only mean well for him. It didn't matter if it would start to rain. Stanley would not he was free and no control at all. You know the thunder, and from that day onward.
Is he cutting out or?
Afreemanornot, you're cutting out. Hello? Afreemanornot, you're cutting out a little bit.
Let's see, I have a couple of problems with the sound here. Give me a moment.
All right.
All right.
We can hear you now.
Wonderful.
All right. Wonderful.
So, how was that?
That was great. Is that the end?
It is the end, yes.